Hello, my name is Ananda O'Brien, and I want to begin my lesson with an opening line, and I just want to talk about how well-chosen stories give meaning and structure to the way children see the world. And books reinforce values such as kindness, compassion. They celebrate creativity, spark imagination, creative thinking. Most of all, they offer a safe, secure context for sorting out feelings and ideas. And books address the fears and problems of childhood and play a special role in the children's developmental process. Most of these stories deal with situations a child might experience. And I went and saw Where the Wild Things Are this weekend, the movie, and I loved it. And I was like, you know what, there's a lot more behind this book than just pictures. You know, there's a lot we can take from this as teachers, and a lot in this book has to do with childhood development. So I like to begin my lesson with reading this book just to kind of refresh your memory and what it's all about. I'm sure everyone's familiar with this book. So Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. The night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one of a kind, and another, his mother called him Wild Thing, and Max said, "I'll eat you up." So he was sent to bed without eating anything. That very night in Max's room, a forest grew. And grew. And grew until his ceiling hung with vines and the walls became the world all around. And an ocean tumbled by with a private boat for Max, and he sailed off through the night and day. And in and out of weeks, and almost over a year, to where the wild things are. And when he came to the place where the wild things are, they roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. Till Max said, "Be still!" and tamed them with the magic trick of staring into all their yellow eyes without blinking once, and they were frightened and called him the most wild thing of all. And made him king of all the wild things. "And now," cried Max, "let the wild rumpus start." Here's them jumping around, screaming and hollering. "Now stop," Max said, and sent the wild things off to bed without their supper. And Max, the king of all the wild things, was lonely and wanted to be where someone loved him best of all. Then all around from far away, across the world, he smelled good things to eat. So he gave up being king of where the wild things are. But the wild things cried, "Oh, please don't go. We'll eat you up. We love you so." And Max said, "No." The wild things roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. But Max stepped into his private boat and waved goodbye and sailed back over a year and out of weeks and through a day. And into the night of his very own room, where he found his supper waiting for him. And it was still hot. All right. So, I wanted to pull a few things from the book and the movie as well, and I'll explain what happens in the movie for those of you who haven't seen it yet. Kind of how all of this relates to teaching, and I pulled insights in kind of a different symbol for each insight. So I read this really great article in the Washington Post about how nature is successful for a child's learning and development. And it really is a laboratory for learning. It virtually begs young children to use their imagination in their hands, to take things apart, put them back together again. And so how this relates to the book is the entire book takes place in the forest, and there's so much, there's trees and rocks and, all these different things that enhance the student's learning experience. So I brought some pine cones and rocks and leaves from outdoors because I think it's really important that children have a chance to go outside and explore. Specific knowledge is retained longer when multiple senses are used. And we talked about this in class, how your memory, you'll retain things for a longer amount of time if it's associated with a specific odor. We need to expose our students to so many different things that stimulate all their senses. So there's this really funny part in the movie, and I was going to show this on the computer, but I don't think I'll have time to do it. But when Carol, there's this big monster, he meets Max, and he starts sniffing him. And then he starts like poking him and like touching him, and then Max turns around and does the same thing and starts like smelling him. And this is like how they become associated with each other. And for young children, this is how they learn. They like poke at things, they want to grab them, they want to smell them. Like it's something that we need to tie into our lesson plans. My next insight, psychologist Albert Bandura is well known for his development of the social cognitive theory and model behavior, something we learned in our last class. Which refers to that children learn from modeled behavior and what other people are doing. And so in the book, when Max grabs his crown and he puts this on, and he gets up and he starts screaming and jumping around, and all the monsters get up and do the same exact thing, and they model his behavior. So they're learning from Max, and they kind of go wild too. So I thought that was a great way to tie in Bandura's theory. Students between 9 and 11 years old admire and imitate older boys and girls. And Max is around that age in the movie, and I'm assuming he kind of is in the book too. But in the book, in the beginning, he has a snowball fight, and his older sister and friends come over to the house, and he really wants to be a part of that group. And they're all older than him, and so he takes a snowball, and he chucks it at one of the older kids. And they all go after him, and they have this big snowball fight, and then the older kid smashed his snow igloo, and he starts crying, and this poor little boy, he just wanted to be a part of like the older group. And so we really need to keep in mind that these kids like look up to older kids, usually around from age 9 to 11, and how to help them deal with that, because there can be a lot of letdowns if they aren't included in play. Another thing, an age level characteristic, is that they look to adults for guidance and approval. And in this book, he is very attached to his mom, and it's a big issue for him to always like be tied to his mom, and he feels alone and on his own when she's not there, or he feels that he's being ignored. So we need to keep that in mind in the classroom as well, that they need that attention, especially at that age. Appeal to a student's interest while appealing to their self-identity is really important, even if that means their wild side and they are a little terror, and they can be a wild thing sometimes. It's important that we can relate to that and appreciate that in their personality. Something else we talked about in class, do kids like to be scared? Sometimes, yes, they love to be scared. They like danger, followed by a release of danger, but then they also like to come back to safety. And so this boat kind of represents like danger, and he goes out into the ocean, and he wants that level of excitement. And so he goes to the island where the wild things are, but then they beg him to stay, and he wants to go home towards safety and his mom. So in the end, he gets all the crazy danger, but he does want to go back to his mom in the end, and he goes back for that security and safety. So that's something we need to keep in mind for that age level as well. Some of the strategies that you can use with this book, so I think there's a lot you can do with this book for a bunch of different age levels. So creating an outdoor exploration for students, maybe when you're reading this book, it could be outside, and reading out loud strategy. Every time you say wild things, the kids get to get up on their chairs and jump around and go, woo, and like scream, and it gives them a chance to just get out all their wild energy, and it's fun, and they'll remember it, and it relates to the book. Brain gym strategies, of course, this ties into the jumping around. The exercise brings oxygen to their brain, and they'll hold on to the lesson plan and ideas learned from the book. Risk takers, when asking students to volunteer and participate, or maybe to read out loud for this book or ask questions, ask for risk takers. Ask for, be like Max. He is courageous and loves danger. I want a risk taker like Max to raise their hand and answer the question. And then bonding with your students is also an important tool to increase effective learning. Something like in this book, Max doesn't feel like anyone relates to him, and that's why he gets frustrated and angry and lashes out. He's frustrated, and he doesn't want to eat his food, and he kind of butts heads with his mom. And sometimes when kids do start to retaliate, we need to understand where they're coming from, bond with them, and let them know that we're on that same level and we understand where they're coming from, even when they're wild. Sending your students home with one thing they learned is really, really important, and I really like that. Something